Hi, everyone. Welcome to Beyond the Mat. We still have a couple of minutes before we get started, but my name is Christina Raskin, and we're here today to do our yoga chat about yoga psychology and yoga philosophy. If you're online and you have any questions or comments to start us off, please go ahead and feel free to comment. And I'm just going to wait another minute or two just so that we start right on time. Our theme today is shadow work. So hello everyone, welcome to Yoga Beyond the Mat. My name is Christina Raskin. I'm the National Training Director for Oxygen Yoga and Fitness. And we've been doing these chats online now every Sunday morning to talk a little bit more about yoga philosophy and yoga psychology and ways that it can help us. I'm just going to get a little more light in here. Okay. All right, so welcome everyone. So great to see all of you back again. Thank you for joining me. Today's Yoga Beyond the Mat is a discussion around shadow work. So this actually came up in our chat last week, and many people wrote and said that they were interested in it and they wanted to hear more about it. So thus we're chatting about it. And just on that sense, hi Jen, welcome. Just on that, if there's anything else that you want to discuss at any time, future themes, please feel free. Comment in this comment session, PM me, private message me, and let me know. I'm always looking for more themes, and we will be doing more of these. So let's go ahead and get started, shall we? So today's session, Yoga Beyond the Mat, we're going to be talking about yoga philosophy and yoga psychology and how it relates to shadow work. Many of you expressed that you liked this idea of shadow work and you wanted to work on it more and learn more about it. So that's what we're going to chat about today. As I chat, any questions that come up, I'd love for this to be an open dialogue. So please feel free to ask questions. I'll keep my eyes on the comment section and respond to questions as they come up. All right, so shadow work, and how does that relate to yoga philosophy and psychology? So shadow work is a term that was developed by Carl Jung, he was a Swiss psychologist, and he started psychology in the late 1800s. And he worked with Freud a lot, and he's a big person in the psychology world in the sense of the Western psychology and how it developed. So he termed this term shadow work. And it's pretty interesting because it really relates to a lot of the yoga philosophy as well. So I want to take a moment to talk about this word psychology. So psyche is a Greek word from the Greek philosophers, and it actually means soul. So in Western culture, a lot of times when we say psychology, we're talking about the study of the mind and the personality. And psychologists help with healing people's minds and personalities. But psyche actually means soul, so it could also mean soul, study of the soul. So it mostly means study of the mind, personality, and soul. In Western psychology, most psychologists use the framework of the Western medical system, which is when there's a symptom, when there's a problem, then we work on that, we heal that, and we bring the person up to a baseline standard where they are able to live in their life and be efficient and effective in their life. So this baseline health, if you will. And so psychology, modern psychology, for the most part, works on that premise. If there's a problem, there's a symptom, we heal the mind and the personality and bring them up to a baseline of functioning citizen. Carl Jung was a little bit different. He was a little bit more, and he's the one who termed this term shadow work. He was a little bit more broad and inclusive, I would say, which is also what yoga is. And so yoga is a little bit different in this idea of psychology, study of the soul, study of the mind and the personality. Yoga is more proactive. So instead of like the Western standard of there's a problem, we're going to try to fix that, that's reactive. Yoga is more proactive. Yes, there might already be problems, But we're evolving and we're learning and we're growing for more contentment and to be proactive in our health instead of reactive once there's a problem. The other big difference is instead of bringing us up to a baseline of a functional human, yoga's practice is really to bring us up to an optimal functioning. So an optimal place where you can really truly enjoy this human experience. So it's not just that I'm functioning now, it's that I get to enjoy and have contentment and passion for this life. And so yoga as a psychology, I think, is much more broad and inclusive, and I find much more helpful. So I've done a lot of therapy, I've done a lot of shadow work, and I've done all of that, and I've found it very helpful, definitely. So I'm not putting that down, but I'm trying to discuss the differences between Western and Eastern psychology, yoga in particular. I've found the tools of yoga to help me so much, and to help me, I would say, more. Now, maybe they helped me more because I'd already had that Western help, and then the Eastern took it the rest of the way. I'm not sure. But I definitely find the Eastern or the yoga psychology philosophy to be more integrative and more whole. So I'm going to talk about what we can do, how we do this, and how these two interrelate. So Carl Jung, even though he's a Western psychologist, he's one of the few that has more of an integrated approach. And that's why yogis talk about shadow work a lot. He termed that term shadow work. But really, yogis for thousands of years have been doing shadow work. So what is shadow work? Shadow is this idea that within us, within our personality, within our mind, we have parts of us that we are either ashamed of, or parts of us that we have repressed, parts of us that maybe we were told in childhood isn't the way we're supposed to be. And so we have this shadow part of our personality, this part that we keep in the dark, this part that we don't look at much. Maybe we glance at it once in a while, maybe we kind of know it's there, but this area that we repress. And again, this can either be because of things we were told to repress as a child, parts of ourselves that we don't like, that society tells us are bad or wrong. It can also be parts of ourselves that happen because of a trauma. And so we have this shadow side of us. And shadow work is the work of integrating that shadow, looking at the shadow, turning a light on the shadow and starting to pull it into our consciousness. So the shadow is our unconscious. And Carl Jung actually has a really great quote. He says, until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our life and we will call it fate. So until we make the unconscious, the shadow part of our personality, until we make our unconscious conscious, it will direct our life and we will call it fate. So the idea behind that is, as we go through our life, the unconscious is directing a lot of our decisions. The unconscious, the stories we tell ourselves, the parts of ourselves that we hide and we don't want to look at, that part of ourselves is directing our lives. We're being reactive. Instead of turning a light on it, seeing that it's there, integrating it in, and then being able to be more proactive in our life, making conscious choices on what we say and what we do. And so the shadow work is the work of turning a light on that, starting to integrate it so that it's no longer running our lives and we can start to make conscious choices on what to do with our lives. So it's really powerful work, hard work, definitely. I'm just going to peek at the comments and see how we're doing here. Okay. So, yes, it's really powerful work. So let's talk about this shadow a little bit more and aspects that can be part of the shadow. So the shadow, again, are parts that maybe we don't like or parts that society has told us is bad or wrong, things we're not supposed to feel. So it can be selfishness. It can be shameful experiences, trauma from the past, things that we don't want to look at and we want to ignore. It can be arrogance, fear, self-centeredness, envy, jealousy, feelings like that we are told are bad or wrong. So these are different aspects that we kind of push into our shadow and don't deal with, but they're still running our lives. And when we have the shadow, which we all have. So please know this isn't if you have this, you're a bad person. We all have it. So we all have shadows. But when the shadow is running our lives, different patterns of behavior can come up. So common ones are playing the victim. Oh, why is this happening to me? Poor me. I didn't have any responsibility. I didn't cause this. The martyr. I do everything for everyone. Giving and loving too much to the point where you're not loving yourself. It also shows up as being controlling, trying to control everyone and everyone around you. Also shows up as I'm right. I'm always right. I know everything. It can also show up as entitlement. I deserve this. I should have this. And when the really big one is judging others, right? Judging others, criticizing others harshly, unfairly. And usually that's coming up when you're judging someone else. A lot of times the way that pops up is it's an aspect of your shadow that you don't want to look at. So what you don't like about someone else is actually a really great way to figure out what your shadow is. So what bugs you about someone else? Oh, I really hate how that person is always talking about how great they are. Chances are you have an element of that selfishness or that arrogance in your shadow, and that's why that bothers you so much about that other person. So this is when they talk about turning the mirror back on yourself. When you're really bothered by someone, turn the mirror back on yourself and see why that bothers you. It's part of your shadow, probably. So anyways, I got off track a little bit there. But basically, we have these shadow aspects. They lead to these behaviors that aren't necessarily healthy or helpful in our lives. So I'm just going to peek at the comments here. I don't have no problem seeing the comments. I just want to, if somebody's writing a question, I apologize if I'm not answering it. Okay, so that's our shadow. And so Carl Jung, as I mentioned, was a Western psychologist, and Western psychology as a whole is generally very different than yoga psychology, but Carl Jung was one of the exceptions. The way he's similar and the way this draws back to yoga is yoga talks a lot about the duality, as we've already talked about quite a bit. The duality, the yin and the yang, the light and the dark, the masculine and the feminine. So this is what Carl Jung was talking about, the light and the dark within us. He's talking about this duality. And the idea is that once we start to integrate the conscious and the unconscious, and this is where yoga comes in, once we start to integrate that, then we start to connect to who we really are, the universal spirit. We start to connect to the divine being. So in yoga, it's believed that we are divine beings having a human experience. So the true ultimate path of yoga is to connect to that divine being and to identify as that, to no longer identify with what we call the ego. So the ego, the way we identify that in yoga is everything external, everything that is not spirit, everything that is not spirit. So my ego is my bank account, the car I drive, the house I own. It's also, or don't own. It's also my body. It's also my thoughts. It's also my personality, and it's also my mind. Those are all considered ego in yoga. That's what yoga thinks we are not. That's not who I am. But of course, in the West, that's how we define ourselves. We define ourselves by our bank account. We also define ourselves by our body, our age, our ethnicity, our culture, our thought pattern. I'm a good person because I had a good thought. I'm a bad person because I had a bad thought. We identify with our personality. I'm outgoing. I'm introverted. We identify with our job. That's all ego. And the full practice of yoga is to start to, you can still be that. It's not saying that's bad. Ego is not bad. But to start to identify as a spiritual being, to start to identify as what's called Atman, this white light, this beautiful being. And so the practice of integrating your shadow in Western psychology still has attachment to personality and mind. It still has attachment and still has judgment in the sense of you're good once you integrate the shadow and you're healed, and then your mind and your personality are great. But it negates the spirit side. It negates the soul. So psychology in the West is study of the mind and personality, where psychology in the East, in yoga, is study of the mind, the personality, and the soul. And that's why yoga is so much more integrated and powerful, I think, as a healing modality. So we can use this idea, of shadow work, even though it's Western, and use it in our yoga practice because it has this light and the dark. It has this duality, which yoga believes definitely. And part of the yoga practice is healing the duality so that we can live more authentically. All right, so all of that history and explanation to explain how do we do this. So we've talked about what are aspects of the shadow. So for those of you just tuning in, aspects of the shadow can be aspects that we don't like about ourselves, aspects that we've repressed, aspects that we've been told in childhood we shouldn't have. So selfishness, envy, jealousy, arrogance, aggression. And it's believed that if we can heal those aspects and pull them into ourselves, then we can live more authentically and have more joy and peace. And I can say for me personally, that's definitely happened. That's been my experience. So how do we do this? First off, for me, one of the biggest things was judgment, right? When we start to look at the shadow, we automatically judge it as bad, right? We automatically judge that as bad, and thus we judge ourselves as bad. And once we can get over the judgment, that's when the real healing can happen. And so the first thing I think is, well, first we have to be aware that it's even there, which we've already done since we're talking about it. But the next one is to realize that no emotion is bad. No trait is bad. If you come back to yoga philosophy, that doesn't define you. My shadow doesn't define me. My darkest parts of myself don't actually define me because I'm a divine being here having a human experience. So no emotion is bad. No emotion is wrong. Your shadow is not bad. Your shadow is not wrong. And we have to get past that judgment. We have to learn to love and accept that side of ourselves before we can fully love ourselves completely. So that's one of the biggest things. And one of the ways that we can get past that is through journaling. So journaling can be very powerful. And I have a couple different suggestions for journaling. So you can just do what I find very powerful is just write. Like just whatever comes out, comes out. A lot of times what comes out is what needs to come out. So without over-structuring it, just write. So that's one way to journal. But the other way in particular, in reference to our emotions, is to write down what you're feeling and why you're feeling it. And so these questions can help you to develop your ability to observe yourself and to see what's happening. So as you journal, again, no emotion's bad. So what emotion am I feeling and why am I feeling it? And on the why side, we usually have to go down a few layers. So this idea, as we talked about the onion, you peel the layer and there's another layer and another layer. Why am I feeling that emotion? What usually comes up first is surface, and we have to go under that. So I'm feeling annoyed. And why am I feeling that? Well, because he doesn't listen to me. Well, you have to go deeper than that. Well, why is that annoying you? And why is that annoying you? And why is that annoying you? And go deeper and deeper and deeper until you find the root. Maybe the idea that he's not listening to you annoys you because it makes you feel like you're not worthy. And that's the root, that you feel unworthy. And so you have to go under the emotion and under the why. So no emotion is bad. And you can journal and release judgment of the emotion by saying, what am I feeling and why am I feeling that? When you do that, that will help you to identify what the shadow is. So identifying the shadow is also a big part of the shadow work. So journaling will help you to identify. You'll get down to the root of, I don't feel worthy. Or maybe the root, a lot of common roots, I don't feel worthy, I am flawed. I'm not like everyone else. I'm different. I'm weird. Something like that might be your shadow. I'm not good enough. Oh gosh, super, super common. My feelings are not valid. These are all kind of shadow aspects that might be underneath there. And then, of course, the other shadows that I talked about, the emotions of like envy and joy, or envy and jealousy and anger, and those sort of things, right? So those are ways, and that's one way that you can start to see the shadow. The other part that I kind of got off topic and already talked about is the mirror. So when somebody else is bothering you or a situation just kind of gets under your skin and you can't stop thinking about it. For me, I was just talking with a friend, a certain situation for the last year or so for me has been waking me up at 3 a.m. And not every night, but I know that that's getting under my skin. That particular person is getting under my skin. And so that's a mirror for me. And so what I have to do is get up at 3 a.m. and go journal about it. I have to turn the mirror back on myself and say, okay, this is what annoys me about that person. And this is what frustrates me so much. And I'm getting up on my high horse thinking that I know better than them and I'm better than them. And this is why they bug me so much. And I need to turn that mirror back on myself and realize that what bothers me about them is part of my shadow. It's part of what I don't like about myself. And so I have to integrate that in. That's my work, not theirs. So that's another way that we can start to find the shadow. So we can find the shadow through journaling, through our emotions. We can find the shadow through mirrors of other people that are bothering us, and we turn that mirror back on ourselves. And the other really powerful way to find our shadow is through patterns. So patterns, in yoga, they're called samskaras. These are these habitual patterns that we have in our lives, these things that we do over and over and over. And as we grow and as we learn, we tend to do the pattern a little less intensely, but we still do the pattern. So I like the image of a circular staircase. So the first time you do that pattern, you're down here in your consciousness and your awareness, and you learn a little something. But then you repeat the pattern and you go up a little bit higher because you've learned something, but you're still doing the pattern. And then you learn something and you go up a little higher, but you're still doing the pattern. And so each time the pattern gets a little less intense, you get a little bit more knowledge and wisdom. Each time you can look down on the pattern and see the layers on what you've learned, but you're still playing out the pattern. So patterns are a really great way to see our shadows. And I'm actually going to read to you a poem that I find speaks to this idea of the shadow. Oops, did I lose you? Okay, so I'm going to read this poem. It's to this idea of the shadow and the pattern. So I walk down the street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I am lost. I am helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I am in the same place, but it isn't my fault. It still takes me a long time to get out. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it is there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. I walk down another street. That poem is by Portia Nelson. It's called There's a Hole in My Sidewalk. And that poem obviously speaks to these patterns or these behaviors and how we tend to do the same things over and over, right? And we all do it. And watching these patterns and watching these behaviors helps us to find our shadow. And one thing I love about that poem is how in the beginning she says, I fall on the sidewalk. I didn't see it was there. I didn't know. It wasn't my fault. And I'm stuck there for a long time. And then each time it's like, oh, well, I saw it, but I still fell in. And it takes me a little while, but I finally get out. Each time there's more awareness around that pattern. And in the beginning, we take no responsibility. In the beginning, it's like, it happened to me. I had nothing to do with it. And with this work, or the shadow work, and as you start to see these patterns, you start to realize what's causing the pattern. The unconscious, what Carl Jung said. The unconscious dictates our life. And we call it fate. We say, I had nothing to do with it. And with the awareness and with the shadow work, you start to see, oh, actually, I did. I'm actually the one who caused that fight. I'm actually the one who did that pattern. And the shadow is causing that. And we start to take self-responsibility. And we start to see how we have this responsibility, but also the privilege of running our own lives. Okay, I'm just going to peek here in case there's any questions. So any questions at all pop up, let me know. I see that there are some. Hi, everyone. So great to see you. Please let me know if any other questions come up. So for those of you who just popped in, I'm just going to do a quick little recap. We're talking about shadow work, shadow being those parts of ourselves that we repress, we don't like, we don't want to look at. It might be the parts of us that feel envy, jealousy, selfishness, the parts of ourselves that were traumatized as a kid, and we don't want to look at those patterns and behaviors. And those patterns and behaviors run our lives. And we call that fate, according to Carl Jung, until we realize that actually that is dictating our lives, and we start to work on it and incorporate it. We start to bring the light and the dark together, which is the process of yoga, the yin and the yang, the unity of the opposites. So how do we do that? First, we have to release judgment. We have to know that no emotion is bad. We are not bad. You are not wrong. And we can journal about that to help us find the shadow. We can use other people and experiences to turn the mirror back on ourselves to find the shadow. And we can look at our patterns to help us find the shadow. So once we find the shadow, or we have an idea, and again, this is a very personal practice, so you definitely can go to people and people can help you with it, but I think it's very personal, and so I don't think there's a one way to do this. I think trusting your intuition and trusting your gut and following that will help you. So these are just some tools and things that I've used. But once you find those shadows, and even if you're like, I'm still not sure, but I think it's this kind of strikes a chord with me, you can start to play with it and work on it. So what we want to do then is investigate that shadow with compassion. Compassion being the key word here. Again, no judgment. Judgment is counterproductive. It doesn't help you. It does not help you on the journey. Let go of the judgment, please. This is such a big one. For me personally, this was the turning point in almost everything. My meditation practice, my shadow work. Once I could let go of compassion or let go of judgment and come to compassion for myself, that was the turning point in almost all of my journeys. So investigate with compassion. Where does that pattern come from? Why do I have jealousy? Why do I have envy? Why do I have aggression? Investigate the shadow and see where it comes from. That can really be helpful and powerful work. I'm just going to read this from Catherine. Catherine says, I don't remember where I heard this, but it resonated for me. Yoga is not necessarily about self-improvement, but about self-acceptance and understanding. Definitely, for sure. Actually, I'm going to go with that for a minute. I'll come back to the shadow work and what to do, but I'd love to touch on that. So this is, yoga is very different than self-help. Very different. And a lot of times they're interrelated. So a lot of times they get confused. And even yoga teachers a lot of times talk about self-help as yoga philosophy. And don't get me wrong, I love self-help. I've done tons of, I read the books all the time. I love it. It has a place. I'm not saying it's bad. It's just very different. And this is similar to what we were talking about in the beginning, that Western psychology is different than yoga psychology. And the reason is fundamentally at its root, there's a big difference. So in self-improvement and Western psychology, the root there is that something is wrong. Something needs to be fixed. In psychology, it's that you're having a problem with your personality, you're having a problem in your relationship or in your life, and we need to fix that problem. Something is wrong and it needs to be fixed. And it's identifying with your mind, your personality, your body, and your life. You're still identifying and connecting to that part of your ego. Where what yoga is, fundamentally at its root, is actually very different. Yoga believes that you're already perfect. Nothing's wrong. You're not broken. You don't need to be fixed. And this, for me, is powerful. In yoga philosophy and psychology, you're not broken. You're not broken. You don't have to be fixed. Nothing is wrong. You're actually perfect just as you are, is what yoga believes. That divine part of you, the divine spirit, is beautiful and it's perfect. And yoga wants you to learn how to identify with that part of yourself, your divine being that's perfect. and stop identifying with the mind and the personality and the body, which is where Western psychology and self-help identify us with. You are your mind, your personality, and that's what we're trying to fix and make you better. Yoga says, actually, you're not that. It doesn't mean you can't be that. I can still be a yoga teacher. I can still be Canadian, a wife, all those things. But that's not who I am, and I don't identify as that. Instead, try to identify as your spirit. Now, this is hard because we're living in this world of ego, and we're living in this manifested world of human experience. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's not that we need to deny that. However, if we identify as our white light and our divine spirit, we realize it's an illusion that I'm that, then we are already perfect. We already have everything we need. We are already in a state of joy and peace and contentment. And so that's the difference between self-help or Western psychology and the Eastern psychology. And I think it's a very fundamental difference. Again, not that the Western can't help us. I think that's a powerful practice too. Jordy says, thank you. Does the shadow always have to come from somewhere in particular, or can it be part of your personality? Great question. So it depends on who you talk to. So in yoga psychology, it would say that parts of it can be your personality. And it would say that those parts of your personality can be karmic from past lifetimes. If you don't believe in past lifetimes and reincarnation, then it would be believed that it comes from this one life experience. So for me personally, I don't know if that matters as much where it originally comes from. If it's there, it's there. And this is also a little bit of a difference between Western and Eastern. So Western a lot of times is, where did I get that? Let's dive into my childhood and figure out the pattern. Where yoga says, yeah, we can do that. There might be value in that. But also part of it is just realizing that that's not who I am. And if I can identify as the divine being that I am, I can just release it. I don't necessarily have to do all that work. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the work. It can be beneficial. But yes, there's that. Do you believe that why is more of a triggering question as opposed to how? Example, how can I support myself to process this pattern and move the feelings? So yes, so actually Hadith, that dives in a little deeper to what I was just saying. Exactly. So why you feel something or why you have a shadow can be helpful work. And that's definitely part of the Western process. So you sit down and you say, okay, I feel that I'm not worthy. Well, why do we feel this way? We talk about our childhood. We talk about, that my parents didn't listen to me. It makes me feel unworthy. And that can help to process and help you to realize where it comes from. However, that process is very left side brain thinking. It's very logical. So for some personalities, that can be more helpful than other personalities. It kind of depends on how you learn and you grow and how you heal and your personality. So that might be very beneficial for you. And I did that, and I definitely think it was beneficial. And to be quite frank, I don't know. For me, it might have laid the groundwork, my Western therapy work, and then yoga grew on top of that. Or maybe it's just that yoga is more integrated, as I said. But that why I feel something, going back into childhood and why I feel that, can be helpful for some people. But yes, the how would be the next thing of how do I start to integrate that, or how do I start to pull that in? And that's more future thinking versus past thinking. And yoga doesn't really do either necessarily. It's more present versus past or future. It's more in this moment. Can I connect to my divine white light versus connecting to my ego? And can I find that connection, which is where the healing is going to come from. However, yoga also believes that we are this divine being having a human experience, and we're having this human experience in order to learn. So my human experience is basically my school. So my life is my school. And by being in this human experience, I learn about myself, and I learn that I'm not that, and I learn that I'm a divine being. So the human experience is necessary to realize that I'm actually not that. I'm a divine being. That's a really weird paradox, I know. Yoga believes that this material world exists for me to realize that I'm actually consciousness, for me to realize I'm actually a divine being, to realize I'm not that. And traditional yoga, I'm going a little off here, but traditional yoga was originally meant to transcend this world. So once I realize that I'm not this, I transcend it and I become spirit, pure consciousness. Modern yoga is a little bit different, and I'd say modern in the last, couple hundred years. There's been a little bit of a shift, and this is also really cool on where the East and the West is coming together. And this idea that actually I am here to be in this human experience and to learn and to grow and to realize I'm a divine being. But as a divine being, I can also really be present in this human experience. And I can love this, the highs and the lows, the pain, the suffering, the joy, and the love. I can really be in this as a human. And because the reason I can be in this so much as a human is because I realize that I'm a divine spirit in this playground of life, versus being attached to it and thinking the pain and the suffering is horrible and feeling the pain and suffering in that way. I can feel the pain and suffering, but not identify with it and realize I'm a divine being. I know, isn't that crazy? I got a little off topic, but I'm going to look at the questions here and then I'll come back to topic. I hope that answered your question, Hadis. Deanna says, so once you discover and understand the shadow, does it also mean I am able to release it? Or how do we release it? Is compassion enough? And yes, that question makes sense. So compassion is the first step. Oh, hold on. Compassion is definitely the first step. And I'm definitely going to talk about some other processes to do this. But basically, once you start to integrate the shadow, it will naturally start to drop away. And this is also kind of an idea of Western psychology versus Eastern psychology in the sense of, and self-help versus yoga. A lot of times yogis, when I say the work is really just to identify a spirit, they say, well, what about all these parts of myself I have to fix? Well, what about all this? What about all the stuff that's wrong with me? Again, that's still Western thinking that something's wrong that you have to fix. But those aspects of yourself that are wrong will naturally start to drop away when you connect to spirit more. Because when you connect to spirit, you're coming from a place of consciousness. You're coming from this love and compassion. So it's not necessarily that I have to release it, although that can be a powerful practice in the sense of helping you to mentally release it. But it will start to naturally drop away as you start to connect to spirit more and identify a spirit more than your ego, if that makes sense. Actually, I want to come back to Hadis's question. I realize I only answered kind of half of it. Sort of half of it. I talked about how figuring out the why of why you have the shadow can be helpful for some personality types. If you're a left side brain, it can be helpful. If you're a right side brain thinker, so more the creative type, more the type that's really connected to people and present, then sometimes for them it's about feeling emotion. It's about feeling it. And so feeling the pain and the suffering, feeling the shadow, feeling the I don't feel worthy. For them, a lot of times visualizations can help. So like inner child work where, I do a visual where I have my inner child in this kind of womb and I love her and I give her kindness and compassion. And so visualizations can work for right side brain thinkers. So Hadis was asking, do we need to figure out why the shadow is there in order to heal it? Sometimes that can be helpful. Left side brain thinkers want to think through, I logically see where that pattern came from. And that can help them to incorporate it and love that side of themselves because they can understand why they felt that way or why they learned that. And then right side brain thinkers, creative types, for them, it might be more about feeling the emotion. I feel that pain fully that I felt as a child that I didn't let myself feel. And I feel the pain and suffering of my inner child. And I do visualizations and work around that to integrate that side of myself in. And so what works for you, again, is very individual. And it's based on your personality, based on what resonates with you, what fires you up, what gets you excited, what you feel like after the work. So try a lot of different things. Try the journaling, and we'll talk about some more. But try different ways and notice how you feel after, right? If you feel, and you might feel depleted originally, but then, a couple hours later. So the first hour you might be like, I feel so drained. But the next day you might feel lighter and better. And then that's a good sign that particular practice works for you. Do we manage these processes of shadow work by applying our filters? Okay, I'm not 100% sure. I know what you're asking, but I'm going to take a guess. So filters, Darshini is asking. So I use this analogy a lot of filters in the sense of we are, if you look at the sun, you look at the beautiful brilliance of the sun, when you're looking at that beautiful brilliance, you can see all of its worth, all of its specialness, everything beautiful that it is. And that is an analogy for us, our beautiful divine spirit. We are love. We are compassion. We are that. We are the divine spirit. However, a lot of times as humans, we start to put filters in front of that. And we put the filters in front of, I am a wife, I am a Canadian, I am my culture, my ethnicity, my body, my car, my bank account, all these filters. And we start to identify as those filters. And through those filters, I can no longer see the beautiful, white, bright sun. And so we can never longer see that we are divine and that we are spirit because we see all these filters of our ego. So she's asking, do we manage the process of shadow work by applying our filters? I think the process of shadow work is starting... I'm going to say shadow work because shadow work's more Western, where this idea of the filters is Eastern and yoga. And the idea or the practice of yoga is to start to remove those filters. So yes, I still am the yoga teacher, the wife, the Canadian. I am still that, but I remove those labels, I remove those filters, and I'm trying to connect and identify with the sun and the white light more. I'm trying to remove the filters. And it's not that those filters don't exist anymore. It's that I don't identify with them. I identify more with spirit. So I hope that answers your question, Darshini. And you can ask again if you can clarify that a little bit more for me. And Deanna says, makes a lot of sense. I had actually updated the question and added, if I truly realize that I'm divine spirit, then the shadow is released. Yes, exactly. But that's hard. And it's, well, I don't know. So it can happen pretty instantly, they say, a Kundalini awakening. So it can happen, but it might take time. And I think a big part of it is just constantly remembering and coming back to, oh yes, I'm divine spirit. Oh yeah, I was acting from that. I'm not that. I'm this, right? So we only have a couple minutes left. So I'd like to come back a little bit more to how we work with the shadow. So just a quick review. First thing, realizing that no emotion is bad. No emotion is bad. And once an emotion comes up, that can help us figure out what our shadow is. So we can journal about that. What am I feeling and why am I feeling that? You can also just freehand journal. Just write, whatever comes out. That'll help. So what am I feeling? Why am I feeling that? Journaling. That will help you to identify the shadow. The other way you can identify the shadow is other people, situations. When something's bothering you, whatever's bothering you about that person, turn the mirror back on yourself. That's what bothers you about yourself. That's part of your shadow. That will help you to find your shadow. Another one that I didn't touch on that helps to find the shadow is through dreams. So dream work, if that speaks to you, if you tend to have really active dreams, write your dream first thing in the morning. It's generally said that every person in your dream is actually an aspect of yourself, which I find to be true about 50% of the time for me, or maybe it is all the time and I just can't put the connection together. But for me, it's about 50% of the time. And the main key for me with dream work is, how do I feel? What do I feel in the morning? Do I wake up feeling anxious, sad, grief? That will help to tell me what I'm processing. So dream work can be helpful. And then the last one that we did talk about is patterns. Watch your patterns, that hole in the sidewalk that you fall in. What is your pattern? And once you, through your patterns and your journaling, your emotions, and maybe your dreams, you can start to identify your shadow. And once you find that, investigate it with compassion and kindness. Please, 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 please love yourself. Compassion and kindness for your shadow. So we want to acknowledge that shadow, we want to befriend it, and we want to embrace it. Trust me, when I was able to finally forgive some of my shadows, it was revolutionary. So love and embrace. Know that everybody has shadows. You're not a bad person. Don't identify with the shadow. The shadow's there, but we don't identify with it. It's just something that's there. And so start to love it, start to embrace it. And start to bring it to the surface so that you can fully love it. And sometimes that's telling someone. right? Especially if it's something from childhood or something that you've kept as a secret. It can be helpful to tell people. That will bring it to light and help you to embrace it. Embrace it with compassion, non-judgment, and forgiveness. Forgiveness, definitely. And then a couple of others I'm just going to touch on because we don't have a ton of time left. A big way with yoga that we do this is through chakra work. So working on the 7 chakras, we have more than 7, but the 7 are the main ones. And you can work through each one chronologically. Start at the root chakra, eat the fruits or the root vegetables for that chakra, wear the color red, use the poses for that chakra, use the mudras and the mantras, and then just work your way up each chakra. You could spend a week on each one, a month on each one. That's one way to really integrate. And once each chakra actually has a demon personality. So our root chakra in particular is fear. And so when you're working on each one, that will help you to tell you where your shadows are, because the demon of that particular chakra will be something that you tend to see in your journaling and in your patterns, that you tend to do the same patterns out of fear, maybe. And then you need to work on the root chakra a little bit more, and that will help you to integrate that part of your shadow. The other one is kosha work, which is a big, broad thing for us, and we don't have any time left. But there's 5 koshas or 5 bodies, according to yoga philosophy, and integrating those 5 koshas will help you to come back to divine spirit as well. The other one that we did talk about is feeling. Feel the emotion. If you're a right side brain thinker, if you're a creative type and you like music and drawing and those sort of things, then feeling the emotion will help you to move past it. Feel it completely. Allow yourself to cry. Allow yourself to get angry. Allow yourself to hit something in a healthy way. So feeling the emotion will help to integrate it as well. Of course, the other one I come back to all the time, meditation, really important, really helpful. Inner child work as well. And then the last one that I want to leave you with is actually so hum, or hum so. You can actually flip it either way. This is a mantra. Let me just peek here. Can we ever really work through the shadow if the ego is present? Good question. So if you're talking about from a yoga perspective, from a yoga perspective, this is complex. From a yoga perspective, you can reach samadhi, which is complete connection to consciousness, and still participate in the human world and still have your ego. And the ego is not a bad thing. Again, ego is not bad. So I can still participate in this human experience and be a yoga teacher who's Canadian and still have my ego. The ego is present. It has to be present for me to live this life and for me to fulfill my dharma. However, I no longer identify with it. So samadhi is when you're completely connected to consciousness, and there's 10 different levels of samadhi, but you can be connected to consciousness and still participate in this world. And your ego is still present. You're using your ego as tools. So my tools of being able to communicate well, being a people person, those are tools that are part of my ego. But when I identify with it, that's when the pain and the suffering comes. When I identify as divine being who's using that ego as a tool to live out my dharma and to participate in this world, that's different. So the ego is still present. It's just we're not identifying with it anymore. The ego is not bad. It's not that we're trying to kill or slay the ego. It's necessary if you're going to live in this life. Okay, I hope I answered that question. All right. So any more books about the 7 chakras? Yes, lots. I will put them in the comments section. There is, I don't have it nearby, so I can't grab it. But there's one lady who's amazing, and she actually does a beautiful book, Eastern Body, Western Mind. And she's a psychologist, and she bridges these together, the chakras and her psychology practice. I always have a hard time pronouncing her name. That's why I'm not saying it. Andia Jodith. Anyways, I will write it in the comments, but she's great. But the last thing I want to leave you with before we end, because we're supposed to be doing 45 minutes today, I'm already over, is this meditation of So Hum. There it is. Thank you, Catherine. Anodia. I always have a hard time saying that name. Yes, she's amazing. So all of her books about chakras are great. So the last thing I want to leave you with is so hum. So hum means I am that. You can also switch it and do ho sum, which is, or hum so, I'm sorry, is that I am. And what this means is I am that. I am the sun. I am the divine being. I am consciousness. Not I am my ego. I am this divine being. I'm a divine being having a human experience. So hum, or hum so, I am that. Helps us to connect to that and to identify as that instead of identifying as our human experience. So that's a very powerful mantra that you can use to start to integrate these aspects of yourself and just to remind yourself that you are more than your shadow. You're more than your personality. You're more than your mind. You're more than your bank account. All of those things are all ego, which is not bad or wrong. It's just not who you really are, according to yoga. And that realization and that reminder, it's constantly a practice. I have to remind myself constantly, has helped me a lot. So I am that. So I hope you find that helpful. I just want to let you guys know, unfortunately, we are not going to be doing this next week. I have been waiting for a surgery that I just got the date on, so I'm going in for surgery on Thursday, which I'm bummed because I really wanted to do this every Sunday. So I'll definitely be taking a Sunday off. Maybe I'll be back the Sunday after. We'll see how I feel. I will try to keep these going once I am well enough to do them, because I've been loving them. And please, 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 if you have any questions for me, any recommendations about future topics, please comment here. You can private message me if there's something personal that you want to share. You can also private message me on Instagram, Christina R Yoga. I'm here to chat. I would love to dive into this even more. Oh, and also please watch my blog. I put a lot of stuff when people ask me questions. I end up blogging about it a lot of times. So if you have a question, it might be on my blog. That's ChristinaRaskinYoga.com. And yes, I apologize. I'm not going to be here next week. I'm sorry. I'm going to miss you all so much. But I will see you soon. Thank you all so much for taking this time on your Sunday morning. I hope you are all doing well. Thank you. Namaste. Thank you, everyone.